right, hello everyone. This is going to actually be the kickoff of a new segment of the Immersion track, which is focused on our committee for OCP Immersion Solutions. So I'm going to start off and do a quick overview of the OCP Immersion Solutions group. And then what I'm also going to do is I'm going to save time to do highlights for two of our work streams that don't have individual talk tracks today, the failure mode and effect analysis group, and also the total cost of ownership group, which Andy and Eddie lead. So I'm going to turn it over to them at the end to give a quick flavor of what the TCO group does and how you can participate more, and also a nice little ad for their roundtable session that they'll be hosting tomorrow. Let's see. Let's see if that works. All right, here we go. All right, so the OCP Immersion Solutions organization falls nicely under the Cooling Environments Immersion community. If you were at the first talk of the day today, Rolf provided a really nice overview of how all of these different organizations and work streams all collaborate together and how they're generally organized. So we went through a reorg this year, and where we landed was to actually break up the individual work streams into 4 different categories. One is the solutions group, the fluids group, the reliability group, and the IT equipment group. You've already heard from Peter on the the fluids group. You've heard from Samantha on the reliability group, and this is solutions. So overall, the goal of the solutions group is to really empower this ecosystem and to help to bring together all the different component suppliers and vendors to be able to really look holistically at the systems level, at these critical features that are required to be successful, both in terms of performance and safety of this equipment. The other area that Immersion Solutions is accountable for is actually being able to provide recommendations into products for the OCP marketplace. So if you've heard Steve Helvey, he is a huge proponent of this. So any kind of products that actually are intended for immersion applications can actually be posted on the OCP marketplace. This is an additional way to actually empower vendors that participate in our work streams and also just in OCP in general. And this is another aspect of the work that we do within OCP Solutions. Our OCP Solutions work streams are highlighted here. You'll hear talks today on immersion requirements, on power distribution, on hardware management, on TCO, and on FMEA. So these are the workstream leads that really help to make this group successful, along with a massive community of volunteers behind the scenes. Our community demographics are shown here, and what I'll say is that this survey is a recent survey, so I'd encourage you to take your phones out and scan the QR code now. It'll take you to a form, and it's going to ask you a couple of questions. It'll ask you your place in the ecosystem, your level of engagement within the OCP immersion community today. And it'll also ask you things like, how long have you been involved? How would you like to be involved more? What would you like to see happen? That type of feedback is really important for us to make sure that the things that we're prioritizing in our work streams remain relevant to the needs of the ecosystem and industry participants. It also allows people like me to connect with people like you to make sure that as we put out different requirements documents, best practice documents, as we create new work streams, that you are able to actually contribute effectively. So this is an evolving process. We know that technology will continue moving forward, which is really exciting. We want to make sure that we're able to maintain updates to the documents, best practices, and key activities that we're pushing forward as we go on. In the solutions community, some of our top challenges and opportunities are listed here, and I think they're fairly straightforward. The first one really is that representation matters. And again, if you're able to fill out that survey, that helps us to make sure that we're prioritizing the right things to fit the needs of the community and to really enable adoption of immersion cooling at scale in the industry. There's importance to have diversity in approach and to recognize that there's a lot of diversity out there. I am a chemist by trade, and I love to innovate. I think this is a really rich ground for innovation. It's also really important to make sure that we're able to recognize that there are a lot of different ways to approach immersion cooling. Different system designs, different component designs, different product designs. And so making sure that the guidance that we put forward into the community takes into account all of that diversity as much as possible and reflects the true nature of the vendor profiles that are here is really important to us. Community growth. Rolf really leaned on this one heavily. This immersion community that we have here it's growing, and it's much bigger than it was this time last year. So we have to make sure that we are being as inclusive as possible. There was a question earlier about component design, component management. There were other questions about how do you effectively prioritize recommendations for materials that are being included. Things like that are very, very important questions that have to be addressed in this community. And as a community grows, it allows us also to get feedback from you in your own subject matter expertise to be able to improve the guidance and recommendations that we put forward. There is a sense of urgency here that we want to make sure that if there's a finite window where immersion adoption is really going to accelerate, that we've laid the right foundation for performance and safety and to actually empower vendors in this space to innovate and differentiate their products in time for that scale. And the last thing is that balance is critical. So making sure that we're providing a good balance of safety and methods and standardization, which can be restrictive on one side if it's too heavily emphasized, and also on the other side, innovation and performance and design. If you have too much flexibility, you might lead to a situation where there's no standard. It's really complicated to adopt as a customer, or it leads to unsafe practices. If you go in the other direction, then it's really difficult to actually innovate and continue to push the bounds of thermal performance. So call to action within this immersion solutions community. These are just some highlights from some of our work streams, and I'm sure a lot of the individual items that you see here will come up later in these sessions. For the immersion solutions community, again, scan that QR code. Participate in our survey, help us to understand how we can better meet your needs and better engage with you as an individual. There's also a block in there, a window in that form that allows you to say, you know what, I would like to volunteer to share some of my use case data. That's something that's a huge gap, I would say, in our immersion community today is successful use cases where we're able to share our insights and really build on those insights to create something bigger and better. In the immersion requirements workstream, if you want to participate at what I'd say is like a higher commitment level, right now that immersion requirements document is up for revision. So this is the time for the community to provide input into how they would like to see that requirements document to be modified, added, changed in some way, and to contribute in that level. A lower level requirement is simply to participate in the update sessions and to look at the document once it's been processed, to provide feedback at the final stages. So that's more of a light touch. For the power distribution work stream, there's a call for contributors. Right now, that group is creating a design spec for immersed power supplies. This is something that is very, very exciting. And what they're looking for is more eyes, more subject matter experts, and particularly they're looking for vendors or SMEs in the power component area, or somebody with strong technical writing skills to actually help write up that base spec. And the TCO model, you'll hear from Andy and Eddie a little bit later, but they're looking for people to actually participate in the roundtable session tomorrow to test out this beta version of a TCO model and to provide feedback based on your experience to help to make that a more effective tool. And the last thing is for FMEA, the failure mode and effect analysis workstream, we're looking for one additional workstream co-lead. So Adrian has stepped up as one of our volunteers. We're looking for one more person to fill in that seat. So with that, I'm going to shift to the second half of this talk, which really is going to be providing two different workstream examples. One is the FMEA, or Failure Mode Effect Analysis group, and the other is highlights from our TCO group, or Total Cost of Ownership. Failure mode and effect analysis is something that a lot of people don't get really thrilled about. It's kind of mundane, it's very data-driven, it's like the accounting version of the work streams. You know, we really are prioritizing in this work stream stuff that It might not be the most exciting stuff, but at the end of the day, this is some of the most important work that's being done right now. The reason why is that FMEA identifies different risks and vulnerabilities that are associated with the system as a whole, as well as different components. It allows us to do scenario assessments, so understanding for these different failure modes, what is the likelihood, what is the severity, is there a cascading risk or a domino effect that's possible? What existing safeguards or proposed safeguards should be in place? And finally, risk mitigation strategies. As customers seek to actually improve their thermal management approach, one of the biggest challenges and hurdles they have to overcome is understanding what risks they're taking on, what liabilities they might be taking on to be able to do so. As equipment vendors start thinking about warranties or services that are provided, they have to start thinking about the financial risk involved as well. So FMEA actually goes through and it does the detailed assessment of all of these different failure modes and the risks associated with them. And the output specifically is to identify what are those high priority areas, how can we actually provide best practices to avoid those failure scenarios, or provide recommendations for different safeguards that can be actually implemented at the equipment or component level. The first focus of the FMEA group was actually on ignition. We saw that as the biggest concern in this space for catastrophic failure, so we wanted to start at that item. Ignition is really important. We wanted to focus on two different scenarios, focused on two key chemical properties. So the first one is a flashpoint scenario. So the fluid forms a vapor. That vapor actually comes into contact with an ignition source, either a flame or a spark would be most typical. The second type of scenario would be one where the auto-ignition temperature is in play. That's where the fluid becomes a vapor, and that vapor hits a hot spot and ignites. It's typically a much hotter temperature. The ideal output for this initial effort was to be able to provide recommendations into standards bodies. So it's not just understanding what is the risk and how do we mitigate it, but it's also providing guidance into groups like IEC to make sure that we have updated standards and codes to help support this industry moving forward. The process that we used here was in Miro, and Miro has been a really nice place for us to brainstorm. We were able to identify things like what is the scenario, what is the failure mode, what is the safeguard, and we ended up actually collecting 7 different categories or organizing ourselves in 7 categories with over 1,000 different entries. This is a very, very exhaustive list and greater than 100 entries for the structured ranking process. This has really helped us to flesh out what are these key scenarios that we're most concerned about that lead to the most significant or devastating failure, or the ones that we think are most likely to happen, to identify what safeguards we can actually apply, and then we can implement those in our requirements document to actually provide guidance out into the community. The last thing I'm going to show is a highlight for me, which is we identified a couple of key scenarios related to the power supplies. We know that power supplies are starting to be immersed, and we saw this as a place where potentially some type of abnormal operating condition might lead to a failure. The fluid might get overly hot. Certain safeguards that are designed for air might not be applicable. There might be a risk of auto-ignition or some similar type of failure. And so we actually were able to liaise with our own community, our own work stream, with the power distribution group, and actually generate some data to help validate what is this type of scenario, how severe is it. And those guys, if you want to listen to what they learned, are actually talking right after me. So this is something that's really exciting and I think really emphasizes the collaborative spirit of OCP. We were able to identify the failure mode, and we were able to actually test it out, prove it out in real life, and recognize that it actually wasn't as bad as we thought it would be. The safeguards that are in place still worked. They worked very, very well. And we didn't get anything that was actually a concerning result. So all of this will be discussed in the next presentation, but also we'll be publishing a white paper summary to actually provide out into the community as well. I'm going to hand it over for TCO. Oh.
I think.
Sorry.
Okay, thanks, Amy. That's fantastic. So, so we're here to talk to you today a little bit about the TCO tool that we've developed together in the OCP Immersion group, work stream, together with Eddie, myself, and a host of beta testers and people from the industry in different positions in the infrastructure and the data equipment sides. So it's been a team effort, and we're really happy to tell you today that the tool is available to download right now. And I think later in this deck you'll see a QR code. In fact, I think it's on the screen right now. So as you have done maybe 20 times already, because we love QR codes, this is one more that we think you'd love to access, and the tool's available for you to use and give us some feedback on. It gives you great opportunity to have a go with the tool before what we are doing tomorrow, and Eddie's going to tell you more about the roundtable session on this. I'm here to tell you about the actual technology that we've developed. So we have a tool. It enables you to calculate the OpEx and CapEx performance of a data center based around a range of different types of cooling technologies. That is air-cooled immersion cooling, but it's also been designed to enable you to assess direct-to-chip, two-phase, and hybrid combinations of the same. The tool really operates at what we think is a high level initially, where you have to input basic information on the equipment that you have in a data center based on some reference data center designs, and you can go ahead and access reference equipment data based on power infrastructure and cooling infrastructure, types of tanks and servers and racks. So we've built the model, we've populated it, and we're benchmarking that with the support of Schneider Electric on one of their reference designs. If you want to go to greater depth, you can go from level 1, 2, down to 3, where you can really start to tune, really start to dig into the data, and really start to see where the sensitivities of the performance are to what decisions you make in a data center operation context. It's part of the decision-making process, but it puts numbers behind the claims that we all talk about with immersion cooling in terms of the value proposition.
Yay, so it's a big deal. We have a new tool, it's available for download, and kudos to Andy, who actually is a mastermind behind this tool, so yes. So we do have plans to improve this tool beyond Ref 1.0, but before we go ahead and do that, we want to take a pause, and we want to understand, are we going in the right direction? What are we doing it to maximize usability of this tool? What are we doing to maximize trust in this tool? How we maximize usage of this tool in the ecosystem that, just very simple here shown as we have IT providers, we have technology providers, facility vendors, power and cooling equipment vendors. How we make the tools open, available, and usable by all the ecosystem. So for that, please join us in the roundtable session tomorrow. We would like to hear from you. Here is just some of the opening questions from our end, but would like to hear your questions, would like to hear your thoughts, would like to hear your suggestions. So